My name's Trudi Rainsberry and I'm an autism consultant and specialist teacher. However, I'm also a parent of autistic adults and have other family members who are also on the autism spectrum and or have sensory processing needs and differences. This is the first in a series of short videos aimed at offering practical advice and strategies for supporting children and young people on the autism spectrum, whether they're in the home environment or in an educational setting such as a school or nursery. As parents and carers and as educational practitioners, we are often very flexible, creative and practical in the ways in which we support our children. However, it's often very beneficial if we can be reflective and consider the different strategies and approaches that other people might have found beneficial. Over a decade ago, I worked with a group of amazing parents, all of whom had children on the autism spectrum, many of which had co-occurring diagnoses of ADHD or extreme demand avoidance. And we thought of different strategies and approaches that we thought others would find effective. And I created a leaflet. And since then, I've revised that leaflet. And I will share that with you at the end of this series of videos. So why do we even need to think about strategies and approaches when we're supporting our child on the autism spectrum? Well, although autism isn't in itself always disabling, and in an enabling environment somebody might be able to have their sensory needs met, they might be able to communicate and connect with those around them, many children and young people on the autism spectrum do experience extreme challenges which might be communicated to us through behaviour that we find extremely challenging too. So when we're thinking about what we might need to support, there's obviously communication needs, and making a connection with a child can be extraordinarily important, particularly when they're non-verbal, but also understanding the language our child is speaking, even if they are verbal, where they might be extremely literal in their understanding of things, and we might need to explain things in a different way to them. But also that social communication, where we may hear on many occasions about theory of mind and not being able to imagine how other people are thinking or feeling. I think one of the key things is for us to have the social imagination of thinking about how the autistic child and young person is thinking and feeling. And in order to do that, we need to really connect with them and understand what they are trying to communicate with us and to us. Before we implement any strategies or decide on any approaches that we think are appropriate for supporting our child on the autism spectrum, we really need to build and develop our understanding of the child themselves, trying to think from their perspective and their viewpoint. What are they trying to communicate with us, and how are they experiencing the world around them? So what I like to try and think of doing are three things. The first thing is watching for why. The second thing is writing it down. And the third thing is talking it through. So watching for why, what we're doing is we're trying to understand why our child does or communicates in a particular way. Why do they find something particularly easy on one day, but they don't find it that they're able to do it on another day? Maybe it's to do with the person, maybe it's to do with the environment. So we're watching for why our child finds something particularly easy. However, we might also want to wonder why our child is becoming dysregulated, what they're trying to communicate to us, and why they are doing certain things, so we can see whether there are particular triggers that we might not have noticed before. So an example of this is I would go on the school run with my children many years ago now, and one of my children who is autistic would become really dysregulated when I was taking them to school, and I couldn't understand it. And it wasn't every single day, it might have been once a week, and I couldn't understand what was happening. They became extremely dysregulated, screamed, shouted, kicked the back of the chair, and I couldn't really understand or unpick or see what the trigger might be. However, after a few weeks, it became very apparent to me, after watching for why this might have happened, And what it was I was going on a different route to school, and they were trying to communicate to me through very dysregulated behaviour that they didn't like going on that route. It was something that they didn't feel at all comfortable with. And so I was able to make adaptations and adjustments accordingly. So that's watching for why. The second thing is writing it down. Writing anything down can be really powerful, and any of you diarists out there will know that. However, if you're not comfortable with writing things down, you can also do little cartoons or pictorial images where you might put days and times that certain things happen, whether they're positive or negative. And so you're keeping a record, and it can be very powerful in supporting you when you're wanting to talk to professionals and other external professionals, whether they're paediatricians, speech and language therapists. If you keep a note of things, then it empowers you when you're wanting to talk about it in education and healthcare meetings or in annual reviews and the like. Also, you can use good old post-it notes, and whether you use them at home or you use them at school, be careful if they go adrift, you might want to just put them in a poly wallet. However, they can be a good way of doing it. And also you might want to use the notebook. Now, with putting anything in writing and keeping a record of things, particularly in educational settings, you have to be very wary of writing purely negative things down, because it can end up just being looking at the behaviour and then you have forgotten the child beneath. So you're not actually building your understanding of why the child is doing a particular thing. It actually becomes very negative. And then if it's shared with parents and carers at home, then this can become very distressing for them. So when you're writing things down, do try and make observations of what is working for the child that you're supporting and not just the negative behaviour. However, I also use in the school, you can use a snazzy format. I haven't invented this. This is similar to what people call the ABC model. It's a star chart: setting, trigger, action, response. I might think of doing a different one because it's in the wrong order, because triggers often come after the responses of adults too. So you often can't unpick the trigger until you've been watching it for a while. But it's a good way of recording where things have happened, what time it's happened, and also knowing who you need to speak to, having an initial of somebody that's written the comment down, so that when you talk it through with them, you are able to talk to the right people. And obviously in a school setting, you might want to keep it discreet and just record initials down. Particularly for those children, you might even need a code for those children that are able to read them. I used to keep it high up on the cupboard where all of myself and my staff used to be able to access it. It was a very powerful tool when I had a child in my class who had become extremely dysregulated, and they found it very challenging to remain in school. However, it became very apparent that through using and keeping the star chart, that they were primarily dysregulated before lunchtime. And so it became quite obvious that that child was becoming hangry and needed to have additional snacks, needed to go for lunch earlier, so that they would be able to become regulated and calm and wouldn't be hungry unnecessarily. And the consequences of dysregulation were quite significant with that individual. So that's why we watch for why and we write it down. And then talking it through, which is the third thing, this is where you're having a proactive approach. You're thinking about talking to your partner, your extended family and your siblings if you're in the home environment, or you're talking between lunchtime staff, teaching assistants, specialist TAs, or the classroom teacher and SENCO, and you're trying to have a joined up approach, and you're trying to really be the detective and understand what your child is or children are trying to communicate with you at that time where they're becoming extremely dysregulated. And talking it through can be so powerful and mean that you're able to put some quite simple things in place. When I was working in a mainstream school, certain children would become very dysregulated after morning break time, And it became apparent that some individuals who at that time weren't diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum were becoming very dysregulated, and they needed to come in, have a period of calmness before they were able to carry on and do their work. So those sorts of conversations can be put in place to have that proactive approach, change the environment, have natural light, shut the blinds, changing position, allowing a child to stand at the back of the classroom and jump up and down if that's what they need to do to regulate themselves. And so hopefully if you do those three things, watching for why, writing it down and talking it through, you'll be able to start trying to think about what might help your child and what view of the world and what they're trying to communicate with you. I do hope that you found this helpful for you, and I look forward to sharing another video with you next week. Thank you.